challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli, and it is now time for the Tuesday night live stream. Good evening to all, and very, very happy that you have been able to join me. And there are a few topics that I want to get to tonight, and I want to start with something that we don't really talk about that much on the Gaggle, but sometimes we address it, and that is the case of the two-tier policing in the United Kingdom. We've had a good laugh over the years, and it is years now, over two-tier care. But now we have the two-tier care in action in the United Kingdom, and particularly the policing that we've witnessed in the case of Henry Nowak, the 18-year-old young man who was murdered last fall in Southampton. He was stabbed to death by a Sikh who was convicted last week and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 21 years on Monday, yesterday. And of course, what happened after the sentencing was that the police live cam film or footage of what happened during the arrest was released, and it pretty much confirms what we had learned had happened. But of course, when you actually see it, it's really quite shocking and quite horrifying. I'm not going to play the footage. It's about 3 minutes, and it's available all over the internet, so you can see it for yourself. But I don't really want to distress anyone, and it is very distressing to watch. So you can watch it for yourselves and see what happens. Now, the outlines of the case, I think, are by now pretty well known. There was the confrontation between Henry Nowak and the 18-year-old student at Southampton University studying finance, and this Sikh, and the Sikh ended up stabbing Henry Nowak to death. But what, of course, was the most shocking aspect of the case, and what really is the most truly horrifying when you watch that footage, was, of course, the callousness of the police, who were called to the incident not by Henry Nowak, who was basically fleeing for his life and was already dying and was not really in any fit state to make any call. The call was made by the Sikh perpetrator's brother, who told the police that his brother had been the victim of a racist attack, and so the police arrived in order to adjudicate the racist attack and to arrest the perpetrator of the racist attack. And during the events, the Sikh points out to the to the police, "Hey, well, I've been the victim of an attack," and shows his face, and there are no markings on his face, and then the police see the prostrate body of Henry Nowak, who keeps repeating, and you hear this over and over again in the footage, who keeps repeating that he has been stabbed. The police seem kind of indifferent, and indeed one of them says, "I don't think you have." Um, and then, of course, the most horrifying aspect of this was that he was, Henry Novak was arrested. He was, already passing out of consciousness, and yet they kind of dragged his body um, out and put him in handcuffs and read him his rights. And then they kind of realized that, hey, well, there's something going wrong here. He's not responding, and his pupils are not moving, and so then they presumably, but they try to uh, apply CPR. But that was already too late. But anyway, it's the problem was that the police, when they arrive on the scene, there, here is a Sikh claiming that he had been hurt, he had been subjected to some kind of violence, and then they see the prostrate body of Henry Novak, who was clearly in distress. I mean, there's just no question. He's lying there in distress, and so the question is, whom are they going to believe? And they decided that they were going to believe the claims of the murderer. And they seem indifferent, contemptuous towards the dying boy, whom they seem to accept. Oh, yeah, he had committed some kind of a racist act. And putting him in handcuffs, putting somebody who's already dying and is already losing consciousness, they put him in handcuffs and read him his rights and believe the claims of this Sikh, who obviously is, there's nothing really, nothing much wrong with him. So that all of that is, of course, was shocking, and the media had more or less swept this under the rug, until that Elon Musk got involved, and it was Musk who really, publicized these events, and Keir Starmer, of course, two-tier Keir, said nothing. He was basically, just twiddling his thumbs, and then yesterday he finally issued a tweet, and I want to just show you what two-tier Keir said. And here he is. Says, this is an awful, shocking case. Henry's loved ones have gone through the trauma of a long trial and endured Henry's killer making up appalling claims about their son, who was thoughtful, kind, and deeply loved. It is right that the IOPC, which is a kind of an independent oversight body on police conduct, is investigating the police response to his senseless murder, and we must end the cycle of tragedy by tackling the horror of knife crime. Henry's family, his friends, his university, and the city of Southampton will continue to feel the loss, and our thoughts will always be with them. Now, it's typical, of course, that Starmer immediately brings up the issue of knife crime. It's a matter of knife crime, even though it's clear that this was indeed those race was very much a part of this crime, a race by the Sikh, who was driven by some kind of psychopathic, obsessive, pathological hatred for Henry Novak. He took to him to be a white Briton, and for some reason, and it's clear that there was really no real, no proper, no serious reason. He was driven by such hatred for him that he stabbed him multiple times. Um, so just when we look at something like that, to say, well, this is a knife crime, the issue is knife crimes, was very, very strange, because of course, if it were the other way around, let us say a white perpetrator, and of course a black or an Indian or Pakistani or a Sikh victim, no one would say, "Well, this is a knife. It's a matter of knives. It's all about knife crimes." No, they would say this is about white racism. And this, of course, this goes back to the Stephen Lawrence case, which, if you recall, it happened during the 1990s. And that was the death of a sort of black young man, and then Britain did a whole mea culpa about this. And then Tony Blair promised to set up a commission to investigate racism. And there was, in fact, this commission, the Macpherson report, which published the Macpherson report in 1999. And that declared that there was such a thing as, yes, institutional racism. Very, very dubious that there's such a thing that exists, and nobody really knows what exactly that is about. But nonetheless, Macpherson declared, well, there was such a thing as institutional racism, and that means all institutions needed to do everything they can to eliminate the racism in their practices, even though they're completely unaware of what racism that they were actually engaging in. Now, one of the hallmarks of this the Macpherson report was the stipulation that you can be a subject to a racist attack if you perceive yourself to be the subject of a racist attack. So you may not actually be the victim of a racist attack, but you can actually feel that you are subject to a racist attack, and that counts as a racist attack. So in other words, the issue of racism becomes entirely subjective. Doesn't mean that you actually have been attacked by anyone with any racist intent, but if you feel that you have, then it becomes racist. And of course, it ordered the police to be absolutely, they made 70 recommendations, but the police always to be on the lookout for any evidence of racism in the police, racism, institutionalized racism, and of course, racism among the public. And here, this is where make declared, of course, when racism is white racism. It's the white racism. That's the only racism that means anything, and that is how so that, why the police are always out there sniffing out white racism, which is what happened in this case, and why they believed this the Sikh's claims that he who had launched the stabbing attack, that he had been the victim of a racist attack. Now, we could just simply say, okay, well, that's fine. That's over and done with. Now he's been sentenced to life in prison, and then justice has been done, and so on. However, that really isn't the case, because if you read the judge's judgment, you really get a sense of how intellectually polluted the United Kingdom has become. This is a judge. He's gone through the whole, the legal profession, legal training. He's gone to law school, studied law, supposedly he knows something about legal concepts, and yet he talks absolute lunatic drivel. And you can see it in the very judgment. So yeah, he sentenced the perpetrator to life in prison, um, even though it's basically just a minimum of 21 years, and one has to assume that he'll probably be released in 21 years, which means that the perpetrator, who's now what, 23, so he'll be out, when he's 44, still relatively young, still got his life ahead of him. Um, but it's interesting just to see how intellectually uh, pathetic the British have become. Let's take a look at it. So, of what this judge said in his judgment. So here he is, this uh, His Honor Judge William Mousley, um, and here he says he's addressing the Sikh, and of course he has to get into the whole issue of this this knife that Sikhs are permitted to carry on them. So as you may know, there are all sorts of bans on knives in the UK. Just like in the US, people are preoccupied with the fact that somehow guns cause crime, even though obviously crimes are caused by criminals. But nonetheless, it's easier to make it about guns. It's guns that apparently are responsible for crimes. But of course, then you have the problem. Well, actually, in the United Kingdom, the the gun laws are very strict. It's very, very hard to own a gun in the UK rather than as opposed to the US. But on the other hand, there's still, a very high crime rate in the UK. So how do you explain that? So because you can't say it's about guns because the gun laws are quite strict. Well, then you say, well, it's about knives. Yes, it's all about knives. So in the U.S., it's the crime is about guns. In the UK, the crimes are about knives. So we have to you have all sorts of bans on carrying knives. Now, the law, however, had provisions for exemptions for Sikhs. So they present an exemption, and so Sikhs are allowed to carry knives. However, we were told again and again that this exemption applied only to very small knives. Sikhs, they don't have an exemption to carry big knives. They can carry a very small knife that they actually hang on their necks. That they can do that, but then they're not allowed to carry big knives. So it's called all untrue to say that there's two-tier Britain, two-tier policing. No, that's simply untrue. But as we learn, just even from the judge's own judgment, as I say, this judge is a very unimpressive person. Even from what the judge himself says, it's clear that, that this exemption actually applies to very large knives. They indeed can carry very large knives. And it's not just this very small knife that they can hang on their necks. So just read, first of all, what this judge says. You were sober, but were carrying a large Sikh dagger in a sheath attached to a belt outside of your clothing. It is a strict requirement of the Sikh faith to have a knife called a kirpan at all times. Generally, this will be a small knife hidden from view, often on a length of cord and worn around the neck. That's the story we've been told now for weeks and weeks and weeks. No. There's no two-tier policing in the UK. No, no, it's the same law. You just have the small knife. Hang it. You can hang it around your neck. Not allowed. You can't carry big knives around. You had that, but in addition, the large dagger in a sheath. You are a member of an order of Sikhs called the Nihang, who have a tradition of having a second knife or kirpan, and that is often fully visible, believing that the guru will look favorably on that. Okay, so they are allowed to then carry a much bigger knife. You observe that tradition in your everyday life, at work and in public. However, it was not a strict requirement. Oh, so that is borne out by the fact that neither your brother nor father, who arrived on the scene after you had stabbed Henry, was so dressed. Well, what difference does it make? What difference does it make that it's a strict requirement or not a strict requirement? I mean, who cares? I mean, he was obviously, the issue is, is it legal to go around with very large knives? And it clearly, yeah, it is legal if you're a Sikh. I mean, whether it's a strict requirement or not a strict requirement, who the hell cares? According to Professor Gurnam Singh, professor of sociology and an expert in the field, over the last 30 years, there has been a trend toward younger people wearing a kirpan with pride in a desire to express their cultural identity. They see it as an act of resistance to being denied the ability to otherwise display their identity. Oh well, that's so nice. I mean, I'm so happy that they're able to display their identity. Anyway, then he says the privilege extended to practicing Sikhs of being allowed to be in public with a bladed article, and particularly in respect of the large dagger, a highly dangerous weapon, easily accessible to the wearer, brings with it a huge responsibility. Oh, brings with it a huge responsibility. So it's a matter of responsibility, and alas, you didn't meet the responsibility. But the point is, what the judge here is saying is, yes, Sikhs are allowed to carry very, very large knives that are, not, worn on their belt, clearly visible, and easily accessible to hands that are eager to inflict pain and suffering on others, as this person clearly intended. So the story there's no exemption is a lie. That was a deliberate lie put about by to suggest that somehow no, there's no two-tier system in the UK. No. The same law applies to everyone. Well, they're only allowed to carry this small knife hanging on their necks, purely decorative, nothing lethal. Yeah, you can carry this, this lethal weapon. It's a special dispensation. And whether it's necessary, well, it wasn't really necessary. Your father and your brother didn't do it. Who cares? Who cares whether his father and his brother, the same brother, incidentally, as we'll see, the same, and I mentioned this before, the same brother who phoned the police with the lying claim that his brother had been the victim of a racist attack. Anyway, so then we continue. It is a fundamental principle of Sikhism that any kirpan is worn as a symbol of religious faith and is never to be carried for an offensive purpose. Well, yeah, but you see, that's the point. Sometimes, when you kind of lose your temper, you reach for the knife. And, so that's kind of, so it's not to be used for an offensive purpose, but hey, sometimes it is. But it's not supposed to be. The legal approach to the carrying of such a knife, as long as the blade length does not exceed 9 inches. 9 inches, that's quite a lot. Just when you look at a ruler, And look at how long 9 inches are. 9 inches is that an offense of having a bladed article in a public place will not be prosecuted. So as long as it does not exceed 9 inches, is that an offense of having a bladed article in a public place will not be prosecuted. Okay, well, since this knife that he committed this murder with was not in excess of 9 inches, it was only 8 inches, so that's okay. There has been an acceptance that its possession in those circumstances can amount to a good religious and therefore legal reason for having it. Okay, so he was, absolutely in accordance with the law, wasn't doing anything illegal. He just happened to have a large, sharp knife on him, hanging on his belt, easily accessible to his hands. But he wasn't committing any crime. He was by doing so. No, everything's fine. The blade of the knife will not be on display. Well, that's okay because he was in a sheath, so it wasn't on display. Either it is under clothing or alternatively in a sheath. Fine, excellent. I'm so happy that this was, it was all in accordance with the law. For both, it is a religious and consequently legal requirement that a kirpan should only be used offensively as a last resort. Now, which would include its use in legal self-defense. Well, okay, so it's a requirement. Well, that's very good of you to say it's a requirement. Well, that it should only be used in defense. I mean, it's more or less. You would expect that. Well, yeah. I mean, we tend to frown upon people using knives in order to attack others. I mean, but that's just us, I mean, but otherwise we kind of have this expectation. But notice the tone of this judge going on and on and on and on about the intricacies of the Sikh religion and the Sikh rituals and all the Sikh expectations, as if we're all really very, very interested in all of this. Um, and He says, so it can only be used in self defense. Well, I guess unfortunately that wasn't the case here. In other words, only if use is necessary, and if so reasonable in the circumstances, it is obvious that for use to be reasonable, any perceived threat justifying its use would only be in circumstances of great seriousness and urgency. Yes. So imagine he's now spent these paragraphs going out of his way. Hey, I'm not, I'm not a racist. I'm not anti-Sikh. I'm going through all this. Yeah, this is the requirements of Sikhism that this only be used in self-defense. That's right. So yeah, as long as it's keep it in a sheath, and that's fine. I mean, I mean, can you imagine anybody else? You go through this whole process of saying, well, we kind of have this expectation that when you go around with a knife, a large knife, you're only going to use it, to cut sandwiches. Or you're only going to use it if somebody attacks you. But here you say, oh no, well, they're going through this whole, explanation because they have to show that they're not, that this judge really is not motivated by any kind of racism. No, I'm not racist. I love the Sikhs. I love the Sikh people. That's what he's kind of saying. I really admire their traditions. Um, and then he says, in Belmont Road, you and Henry passed each other. You claimed he deliberately barged into you. I am sure that was one of the many lies you have told and repeated since it happened. However, there was an interaction between you both. Henry, perhaps cheekily, made a comment asking if you were a bad man. I'm not sure how the judge knows this, but okay. He was filming you on his phone when he said it. Okay, so he said that when he was filming it, but we don't quite what was the context. But anyway, he says cheekily. The tone of his voice was not aggressive or threatening, but as it turned out, a tragic error of judgment. Why are we talking about this tragic era of judgment as if somehow, well, he kind of brought this on himself, because when you deal with Sikhs, you have to be ultra polite, ultra respectful, because you never know, the guy might just go for a knife and kill you. So you got to be very, very, respectful. So he was being, maybe he was being cheeky, and he was, an unfortunate lack of judgment. Well, poor guy, he paid for his life with this lack of judgment. Um, and then he goes on. It is a reasonable conclusion that the comment was because he had seen the large sheathed dagger. Hmm. That would have been a very unusual thing for an 18-year-old student and a non-Sikh to see. Okay. You moved towards him and confidently told him that you were a bad man. This was the response, I believe, of someone who thought they were being disrespected. Oh, he was disrespected. Ah. Well, that's just that's it. Well, I mean, if you're disrespected, I mean, what can you do? I mean, it's understandable. Some people react, by knifing someone else. Some people, by punching someone else. Who knows? But he was disrespected. But again, you have to say, why is the judge talking this kind of drivel? Why is he talking about this? That the victim was, well, error of judgment. What error of judgment? I mean, he thought he was dealing, naively, maybe, that he was dealing with civilized people. And, if you make a little joke, a little quip, I mean, you don't really expect to be stabbed to death for it. Particularly as there was nothing in this joke that was disrespectful. But the judge, oh, well, you obviously felt disrespected. Can you imagine a judge? Why is this judge talking in this cretinous way about somebody being disrespected? Who cares whether you're disrespected or not? You go for your knife to kill someone because you're disrespected. Um, and then he said, well, you were being someone who thought you were being disrespectful, made worse by the perceived intrusion of being filmed. Um, okay, so it was made worse. You were not frightened or concerned and grabbed his phone, removing it from him. The exact events which immediately followed were only witnessed by Henry and you. However, it would not be unreasonable to conclude that Henry would have wanted his phone back. Yeah, I mean, most people, if you take their phone away, they want their phone back. Yeah, the judge is right. It would not be unreasonable to conclude that Henry didn't like his phone being taken away. Would have wanted his phone back, believing it had been stolen from him or that he had been robbed. That may have led to a physical struggle between you and him. Okay. In that situation, there was every need for self restraint and control on your part. Yeah, I would think. I mean, if there's a struggle, normally you don't reach for the knife, you don't reach for the gun and kill someone. I mean, but that's kind of the thing. But nonetheless, there was a struggle. You need to have some self restraint. Just it's unfortunate. But look, he was disrespected. What can you say? I mean, he was disrespected. I mean, in those circumstances, these things will happen. And control on your part. As someone who was born and raised in the UK, and isn't the UK so fortunate in having him born and raised there? As someone who was born and raised in the UK, That should have been your focus rather than any distorted view of your religious traditions. Yeah, well, I mean, strong words, even a verbal threat, might have been justified, but no more. Uh, no more. Well, all right. Um, and then he goes on, it would also seem that your turban may have been knocked, pulled, or potentially punched off your head. Well, if a turban comes off it, I mean, that wearing of a turban at all times is another fundamental religious requirement of being a male Sikh. Well, the wearing of a turban at all times is another fundamental religious requirement of being a male Sikh. So that must have really upset him. Well, no, I mean, understandable. He reached for the knife. Not because there's no evidence that Henry had taken the turban off. Even if he had, so what? But no, it was knocked. But they had a struggle. It fell off. But apparently, that's a fundamental religious requirement. I mean, it's understandable he got so upset. The removal of it by another would be considered a serious act. It's a very serious act and a further mark of disrespect. So once again, so that's two acts of disrespect that this judge has identified. Two acts. And so now the turban, he took his turban off, even though the judge is making this allegation. He has no evidence whatsoever for saying that Henry had taken his turban off. It could much more likely by this idiot judge's telling of the story that they had a struggle and the turban came off during the struggle. But it was disrespect. I mean, it's a requirement. Hey, I mean, if you're disrespected, you're disrespected. This is the way. This is the way that was introduced by minorities in talking about it. Well, I'm disrespected. Well, if I'm disrespected, I have to kill someone. I can't live with the disrespect. So the judge adopts this lingo. Oh yeah, well, there's disrespect. He was dissing him. I don't like being dissed. And then so conclusions would have it is a reasonable conclusion that this would only have added to your anger. Yeah, you can see the poor guy. He was just angry. He was angry, and he had a knife on him. Well, what do you expect? When you're angry, you reach for your knife. Good thing he had a knife on him because I mean, otherwise his anger would have been, he would have been frustrated. Um, you drew the dagger from its sheath, and as the jury was sure, you deliberately stabbed Henry in the chest with it. The knife passed through several layers of clothing, as demonstrated by the multiple slits in his dark top where the material had been overlaid on itself in the struggle, and the single slit in his shirt. It passed upwards through a soft tissue between the two uppermost ribs, catching a lung and cutting an important vein behind the collarbone. This was to a depth of 8 centimeters from the skin surface. The consequent bleeding flowed into his chest cavity. The pathologist, Amanda Jeffrey, found 1,200 milliliters or over 2 pints of blood there. She said that no emergency medical treatment would have permitted access to the bleeding vein. In simple terms, he would not have survived. However quickly he received first aid, CPR, or expert medical treatment. Well, that's the judge's opinion. We don't know that. I mean, this is all part of the operation that is now being undertaken to save the police, save the judicial system, and declare that nothing, that even though the police didn't do anything for Henry, basically he bled to death in their presence while they were handcuffing him and reading him his rights. So now they have to rescue the police by claiming, well, even if first aid had been administered there and then, that still would not have saved his life. Well, we don't know that. Absolutely have no idea whether that's the case or not. That's one person, one person's view. And I'm sure that, because I think there probably will be a civil suit, and during the civil suit there may well be um, other experts who say that, well, I don't know, there was still time. He didn't die right away. I mean, so there may still have been time to save him. The police made no you know urgent moves to save Henry, so we don't know. Um, and but here the judge is going into his operation, say, to save Operation Save the Police, and that's what will happen. I mean, there's going to be this independent investigatory body to look into what the Hampshire police was doing. And doubtless they will say that, well, they acted in very difficult circumstances, very, very difficult to know what the right thing to do was. We can't really second guess them. Maybe, maybe they should have been a little bit less flippant, a little bit more sympathetic. Maybe they should have not accepted at face value the claims of the murderer. I mean, you think, I mean, if you're trained police, you don't automatically accept the claims of the murderer. You sort of do your own investigating. This report, when it comes, will without doubt be a whitewash. Whether that will suffice to to head off any kind of a civil suit, that remains to be seen. Um, anyway, then we have this, and then the judge goes on. You also stabbed him twice, so he did. There was one fatal stab, which, by the way, showed great skill on the part of the murderer, because it's not that easy to stab people. You have to inflict a fatal stab wound. You really have to know what you're doing. Otherwise, your knife is just gonna hit, bone and muscle, and it's not gonna do damage. I mean, in order to do damage, in order to to say penetrate the lung or the heart, you really have to know what you're doing. You also stabbed him twice. So after he did the fatal stabbing, he then continued stabbing him. You also stabbed him twice to the upper leg at some point, and once again to the lower abdomen groin area at the front. The latter only resulted in a knife tip injury. The former were both to a substantial depth, although not as deep as the chest wound. Henry's face was also slashed with the blade of the dagger, but I cannot be sure that was aimed or intended. Oh, well, that's, I mean, we're going to talk about that. Whether, I mean, I don't know. He may not have intended to stab him in the face. I mean, that may have been just accidental. Knife slip. He was trying to. He was going for the groin area, and knife slipped, and he stabbed in the face. I mean, what? Why? What is the point of this stupidity? And then these. However, one or more of the four stabs must have had an immediate effect, as Henry was never able to put up his hands to defend himself from further serious injury. He was defenseless. Your brother Gurpreet arrived on the scene very shortly after your attack had finished. You then filmed Henry desperately trying to get away from you, somehow scaling a fence onto a communal bin before landing on a car in front of the property next door. Bloodstains show that he had got one more or all of his injuries before then. And then you showed a callous disregard for his well-being, knowing you had stabbed him to the chest. You continued to make films of Henry suffering, ignoring much of his desperation at having been stabbed. You told him that had not happened, no doubt to convince others who were nearby, and so on. And And then he goes on. Your brother did much the same, although he may have just been accepting that which you had told him, which is, rather than lying himself. You lied to him that you had been attacked, picking up on his questions about whether it had been accompanied by racism, by falsely claiming that Henry called you a packy. I'm sure that Henry had said nothing racist. You were the only person to make that claim, and it is completely at odds with his previous character. Notice when he goes on like this, the suggestion is here that, well, if he had said racist things, then, that would have been yet another mark of disrespect, for an even more serious mark of disrespect, and would have justified the crime. So remember, the judge had already said we had a mark of disrespect by, apparently he said something like, "Oh well, you're a bad man." One, two, the turban came off. But imagine if Henry had been a racist. Imagine that. I mean, the judge said, "Well, no, he wouldn't have said a racist." But if he had been, the judge seems to say, "Well, yeah, then." I mean, that would have been, that would have been considered some, justification, for the murder. Um, so well, I'm quite sure he would not have said that. That's so fortunate. And then, you join your brother in relating lies to the police, but then your mother and father are at the scene. Gurpreet, though that's the brother, explained that no weapons had been involved or were present. In fact, while he was talking to the call operator, you told your mother to take the murder weapon, sheath, and belt away, which she did, um, and so on. And then it was on. In addition to killing Henry and the irreparable harm to those close to him, you have also caused real suffering to others who knew him. You have brought shame upon your family, your community, and your religion. Now, well, he didn't really bring shame upon his family because his family, took part in this crime. The brother, took part in the crime in presenting a false narrative to the police by telling the police that his brother had been subject to a racist attack. So the brother did that, and then the mother, of course, um, hid the murder weapon. So I don't know. I mean, if you're able to, you have what shame? I mean, there's a lot of shame, but then you've brought shame. Just go on here. You brought shame, to your community and your religion. Well, that's appalling. Your community and your religion. Why is the judge commenting about his community and his religion? Your actions have stirred up racial tension in Southampton and across the country, which have made many Sikhs worried about their own safety, even though they have done absolutely nothing wrong. So again, as always happens, the real issue is the reaction by the native white racist population, and how now they might take out their native racist hatred against Sikhs, Muslims, whoever. Now they're living in great fear. Um, and done nothing wrong. Another consequence of these lies is that the attending police officers honestly believed that there were reasonable grounds for suspecting Henry had committed an offense and arrested him, with the consequence he was handcuffed for about a minute before his condition further deteriorated and the arresting officer began CPR. So now they're saying, well, the police had reasonable grounds for suspecting Henry had committed an offense, and the basis, well, that he was lying. This is the story that is being put out now. Police are supposed to be professionally trained. So when they arrive at at an event, and remember, most you normally any um, event, violent event to which police arrive, there's likely to be a number of conflicting stories being put out. There's people going to say this, they're going to say that. There's a lot of conflicting stories. There's some confrontation has taken place, so there's likely to be, this is like, conflicting stories. And the police, if they have had proper training, are then supposed to figure out, in those circumstances, because that's what they do. That's what they're hired to do. Figure out um, what had happened and who's likely to be telling the truth. So what do they do? What did the police do in this case? So they come along. This guy, this Sikh, is claiming that he had been the victim of an attack, and he was claiming he had been injured, even though he's looking as if his face is unmarked. There's no evidence of any injury, yet they take that seriously. Henry Nowak, the young man, the victim, he's lying there, prostrate. He's on the ground behind a car, lying there, just like, just completely, helplessly lying there, in obvious distress. Anybody can see he is in distress. And these trained police officers, decided to believe the Sikh, without any markings on his face, that he had been the subject of an attack, and believed that the perpetrator was this person in distress, and who, as you can see from that footage, and as I said, I don't want to play that footage, it's because I think it is very upsetting, but you can see in that footage that he says over and over again, "I've been stabbed. I can't breathe." And the police, says, "I don't think you have, mate, mate, mate. I don't think you have, mate." But they can see he's in distress. Anybody can see something very bad has happened to him. Person doesn't just lie there behind the car on his back, unless something, even if they say, "Oh, well, we didn't see the stab wounds. We didn't see the stab wounds." Even if that's true, you could see he is in distress. But you can hear it in his voice. He is in distress when he says, "I've been stabbed." You can hear it, and the police conclude, "Well, this guy is telling the truth. This guy is lying." So the judge, who says, "Well, you misled the police," no, 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 no. The police deliberately misled themselves. This goes, as I said earlier on, it goes back to the McPherson report and all the crap that came out from that McPherson report. And so anyway, but the judge wants to make out, well, the police were they were doing their job, and he had misled them. Yeah, I mean, that's what criminals do. They mislead the police. It goes with the territory. You mislead the police. You don't tell them the truth. Yeah, I committed the crime. Yeah, I did it. Yeah, it was me. No, that's not. That's all criminals are going to lie to the police. They're not going to admit it. The police were given a convincing but wholly false narrative of the incident. How was it convincing? What was convincing about it? It was dark, and Henry was wearing a dark top. The entry damage caused by the knife through it would not have been obvious. Whilst there was visible blood on Henry, so there was visible blood. You see, first of all, they say, "Oh, there was nothing, they couldn't see anything," but he said, whilst there was visible blood on Henry, it would not have clearly been seen coming from that wound, and the clearly visible facial wound was not life-threatening. So only if something is clearly, unambiguously life-threatening, only then is it really worth your while getting involved. Otherwise, you're just put the handcuffs on the bugger. I mean, he's his voice is fading. You just put your handcuffs on him. Well, yeah, he had wounds on his face, but they didn't look life threatening. Hey, I mean, it's just it got well, there it was. It was just not life threatening. Um, he says, "I've been stabbed." Well, but that's not life threatening. I mean, what are you complaining about? Shut up. Uh, um, and here we have. It says clearly visible. It's not life threatening. Henry was complaining that he had been stabbed and was struggling to breathe, but that would not have necessarily told the officers how serious the situation had become. Why wouldn't it have done? If somebody says, "I've been stabbed," normally a police would take that seriously. And particularly, he's not standing around with a bottle of beer in his hands. He's lying prostrate and in obvious distress. His voice, reflects his obvious distress. How serious the situation had become. It is the experience of the criminal courts that sometimes someone arrested and handcuffed will feign injury in the hope that they may be released. So he was just feigning injury. There was, the police were saying, well, he's feigning injury, but not, the Sikh wasn't feigning anything. So they believed the Sikhs claim that he had been subject to a racist attack. That's fine. That they believe. But they're absolutely perfectly reasonable to think, well, this guy may have been just feigning injury. I mean, there was blood, but he was feigning injury. I mean, he'd obviously been stabbed in the face. He was feigning injury. Let's just read that idiotic statement again. I mean, it's so rich. I mean, this is a judge. This is somebody who's gone through the legal system. He's gone through law school. He's studied the law. This is a judge. He presides over legal proceedings. And this is the rubbish that he comes up with. Henry was complaining that he had been stabbed and was struggling to breathe. But that would not have necessarily told the officers how serious the situation had become. He was complaining they'd been stabbed, struggling to breathe, but that would not have necessarily told the officers how serious the situation had become. It is the experience of the criminal courts, because this judge who presides over a criminal court, he is a man of experience. It is the experience of the criminal courts that sometimes someone arrested and handcuffed will feign injury in the hope that they may be released. So he's feigning it. He was feigning his injury. It was just feigning. I mean, of course, the police said, well, of course, they decided to handcuff him. He's feigning injury. I mean, he's bleeding. He has injuries on his face. He can't breathe. He's already passing out. These police officers were faced with having to make quick decisions in pressurized circumstances about the best way to act. The genuine shock to the particular police officer when he realized that he had been giving CPR to Henry when he had a serious chest wound tends to show that he was doing his best in a very difficult situation. We don't actually see any CPR. All we see is the handcuffs, and he was reading his rights. The CPR allegedly comes after. We don't actually see any of that. So that's not. The footage that was released doesn't show any CPR. You were still present at the scene when Henry was saying he was dying, and still you did not tell the truth about how seriously you knew you had hurt him and the need for urgency. Instead, you said he had not been stabbed and that he was exaggerating. And the police, of course, accepted your word for it. Anyway, so then we naturally, on the clock, you can time it, and we have the BBC story Sikhs demonized after murders as community leader. Of course, now they're the victims. That's how you change the stories. The Sikhs now become the victim. A leading figure in the UK Sikh Federation has told the BBC the community has been demonized after a university student was killed by a Sikh man using a religious knife. And then earlier this week, Vikram Dagmar and so on. And then this Dabin Derjit Singh claimed the Sikh community has seen a huge increase in hate crime since the trial. Now, of course, hate crime is that ubiquitous term where whereby and this is, as I said, the consequence of the McPherson report, which is, well, it's a hate crime if you think it's a hate crime. I mean, if you say that you've been subjected to a racist attack, then you've been subjected to a racist attack. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you were or weren't subjected to a racist attack, as long as you thought that this person that you didn't like had a racist intent. That's good enough for the police. And you can see, yeah, the police absolutely acted on that. They have, the Sikhs, the murderer and his brother knew the police system very well. They called the police and said, "Oh, my brother was subjected to a racist attack." They brought the police in order to help his brother, in order to arrest the victim of the crime. And so, but the hate crimes, of course, you say, well, what is the hate crime? I mean, we've seen this all the time. The hate crimes, like the rise, 10,000% increase in anti-Semitic incidents. And then you say, well, what are these anti-Semitic incidents? Some Jewish shop being burnt to the ground. Some synagogue defaced. No, somebody saying something nasty about Israel that somebody who was Jewish didn't like, and that becomes a hate incident. Oh, well, then there's a dramatic rise in hate incidents because somebody had to endure a nasty comment about Israel. So in the same way, oh well, there's hate crimes are on the rise. The anti-Sikh hate crimes are on the rise, and then so following the Digman's Convention, that we have, he says, given the political environment, that rhetoric has made Sikhs really think, why are we being targeted? Because this could happen to any community. An individual could break the law and murder someone, but you wouldn't demonize that entire community. Now, it's what's interesting about that comment. And let me read this again, this comment. Because the media always play stuff like this around. So let's just go through that again. Because this could happen to any community, an individual could break the law and murder someone, but you wouldn't demonize that entire community. In other words, that's just an individual committed this crime. This is an act of an individual. You don't demonize the community from which he came. And that, on the face of it, sounds very, very reasonable. Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's just this one person committed the crime, and you can't blame everybody for the crime of one individual. Except, of course, the media don't do that. This is the game that they play when it's a member of a minority group commits a crime. Oh, it's just an individual. That it says nothing about the propensities of the community as a whole. Okay, but what happens when somebody who's white then commits a racist act? Attacks, even kills blacks. Attacks, kills, maybe Sikhs or whoever. Then it suddenly becomes a national problem. We have a national problem of racism. Suddenly, everybody's guilty. Everybody's guilty. Everyone committed this crime. Everybody's the perpetrator. You remember that time when with Dylan Roof, that psycho, went into the black church and then killed the some black congregants. That was about, I can't remember, 2015. Um, I think it was about 2015. Anyway, boom! That was just like the country went. And this was deliberate. And I say the country, but the liberal media elite went absolutely crazy and launched a ferocious campaign to denounce American white racism, American, fascism, and everything. So Dylan Roof apparently represented all of white America. Everybody, he may have pulled the trigger. This Dylan Roof pulled the trigger, but white America was really behind it. It was white America that pulled the trigger. So suddenly, he's not an individual anymore. He's not, because before it was, he's just, in this case, it was just an individual. I mean, hey, you can't blame, the community, blame the crime of an individual on the community, but you can in other cases. And of course, the same thing happened more recently in the case of George Floyd. No, this wasn't, hey, bad cop or whatever. And of course, the George Floyd case was again deliberately miscast and misinterpreted and presented in a very in a malicious, misleading way. But given the way it was presented, the way the media went with that story, that all of America was involved in the crime that was allegedly perpetrated against George Floyd. Not Derek Chauvin, not the cop. No, 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 no. Derek Chauvin was just simply the white cop who had his knee not actually on his neck, but knee on his shoulder. But it was white America. This was the racism of white America. And so suddenly, well, it's not an individual, then everybody is guilty, and hence we had the whole spate of taking the knee. Everybody's taking the knee. Why are we taking the knee? Well, everybody's taking it because we have to apologize. Everybody has to apologize for centuries of racism. We all have to apologize for being racist. So, you think, well, what happened to the individual thing? What happened to the individual responsibility? You can't blame the misdeeds of an individual on the community. No, no, no. And then it says everybody is guilty. So therefore, don't it's always very, very important not to be taken in by this spin that the media are giving you, because that's what you get. Oh, it's just an individual, and that therefore it's just these all just hate crimes. They're just blaming what this one person did, blaming it on everybody. Anyway, and here it says, this, and then after the trial, the UK Sikh Federation wrote to Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood calling for an anti-Sikh hate crimes to be recorded in a similar way to those against Jews and Muslims. All right, so that's what this is from two-tier Kier and the joke of a justice system. I mean, this is just absolutely ridiculous. And this is just, it goes from top to bottom, from the judge, from the prosecutors to the police. Everybody has imbibed this complete nonsense and a complete abandonment of any common sense. So anyway, now the other topic that I wanted to cover today is, and I think some people have indeed have asked me about it. I can see in some of the YouTube comments, which is about what's going on in Hungary. So, as you know, we had the election on April the 12th, and of course, the key part of the platform of Tisza and Péter Magyar was that after the election, Magyar will be able to extract from the EU billions and billions and billions of euros that Hungary was entitled to, but Hungary had been denied because Orban had such poor relations with the EU, and so he was going to do it, or because Orban could never get any of this money back. That was just his relations with the EU was so bad that he couldn't do it. But Tissa and Magyar would be able to do it, and that I think played a very important part in Tissa's victory, because I think Hungarians thought, hey, we're going to get a lot of our money back. Who isn't attracted to that idea? Suddenly we're going to get a lot of money, and so Magyar and his deputy prime minister, was also the foreign minister, Anita Orban, have been going out of their way to make nice with all of the EU worthies. And they made nice with Poland. They made this big trip to see Donald Tusk in Poland, and then they went to Austria, and they made nice with Austria. And they were saying, and they all went out of their way. That Magyar and Anita Orban went out of their way to say, we've turned the leaf on all, that these all the terrible things that went on in the Viktor Orban era, all the corruption and the bad relations and everything. It was all gone. Now give us the money. And so he went to Magyar went to Brussels last week, and seemingly he got a lot of money out of Ursula von der Leyen, and of course both he and Anita Orban went on their Facebook and on Twitter and said, "Yeah, we got the money. We said we'd get the money. We got the money. We fought like ferocious lions for Hungary's interests. Hungary's interests have been protected, and we've got our money." Now, almost immediately, this wasn't really believed, because everyone, anyone who knows anything about von der Leyen and the EU knows that they're not just going to hand money over. They're going to want something more concrete from Magyar. And these are just without some concrete steps taken by Magyar, then Hungary's not going to get a penny. And we know some of the concrete steps. They want this Hungary as part of the European Public Prosecutor's Office. That way they can prosecute Viktor Orban, all the people around Orban, for corruption, whatever that means. So that's one thing. Then they have to change the Hungarian university system, so bring in, all of the liberal, liberal or EU aligned academics, and so they can then be hold important positions in the Hungarian university system. Then they have to make all of the legal and judicial changes that von der Leyen wants. Again, they want the legal system under the control of the EU. So more judges like that idiot that we've been talking about during the first hour of this podcast. So we want those kinds of judges running the show in Hungary. And then, of course, we've got all the LGBTQ stuff. You have to make sure that Hungary aligns itself with LGBTQ norms of the EU, and then they have to have those all those public procurement things, because the EU was very unhappy by the fact that Orban, very reasonably, as a Hungarian patriot, he gave preference to Hungarian companies. He didn't want the Hungarian economy to be taken over by European companies. So he gave preference in the public procurement system to Hungarian companies. So they want that absolutely gone. No favoritism for Hungarian companies. So that has to change. So you can see it's a pretty full agenda, and that's even before we get to the foreign policy, because of course Hungary had pursued an independent foreign policy under Viktor Orban, particularly on the issue of Ukraine. Now, that they definitely want drastic changes there. So far, Magyar has kind of hemmed and hawed. And has said, well, we got to kind of, we got to work something out um, with Zelensky on the treatment of the Hungarians in Ukraine. However, he's also said, this is very important, he's also said that we're close to an agreement with Ukraine on the issue of the treatment of the Hungarians. Obviously, the Magyar government is going to absolutely come to an agreement with Ukraine. Ukraine isn't going to do anything. It's not going to change the laws. It's not going to change the constitution. It's going to make no changes whatsoever. But they'll put something down on paper, and then Magyar and Anita Orban will celebrate that and declare this is fantastic. We've accomplished so much, and and so that's obviously how they intend to do it, and that became very clear today when Magyar visited Berlin. So he went to see Friedrich Merz, and of course Merz, what was on his mind was precisely, what are you going to do about Ukraine? Because of course, when it comes to these Europeans, that's their main concern. Well, what are you going to do for Europe? I mean, we want some changes there. We don't want you pursuing the the same policies as Viktor Orban. The man we absolutely hate, the man that we basically brought down. We brought him down to get you into power, and they did bring him down by withholding this money. That was decisive in the defeat of Viktor Orban. And of course, then when Ukraine withheld oil deliveries for which Hungary had already paid, that all helped to weaken Viktor Orban. So Magyar goes to Berlin to see Merz, and Merz really wanted to know, well, what are you going to do for Ukraine? We're not expecting the same stuff that we got from Viktor Orban. So let's just see how this was covered in the media. It says, and this is Euronews, Magyar teases imminent deal on Hungarian minority to lift veto on Kiev's EU accession. So was another one of those issues that Viktor Orban objected to. So he said, no arms deliveries for Zelensky. We're not going to allow our territory to be used for arms deliveries for Zelensky. We're not going to support Ukraine's membership into the EU. We're not even going to allow negotiations with Zelensky on EU membership. And and then he said, and we're not going to go in for the European Peace Facility. This is a misnomer. It's called the European Peace Facility. What the European Peace Facility does is reimburse EU member states that deliver arms for Ukraine. So they basically that money is coming out of European countries' budgets to deliver for Ukraine, and then there's the European Peace Facility that reimburses, at least some of that money. And Orban said, no, we're not supporting this European peace facility. I mean, you're underwriting war, but you call it a peace facility. But anyway, so um, Magyar goes to Berlin and says to Merz, "Yeah, we're very close to a deal with Ukraine on these Hungarian minorities." And so here's then this Euro story, and it says Magyar says he's very optimistic about a deal on minority rights in Ukraine after years of political impasse. An agreement between Budapest and Kiev on the delicate matter will allow for EU accession talks to begin. Prime Minister Péter Magyar has signaled an imminent deal with Kiev to resolve the dispute over the rights of the Hungarian minority in Ukraine, raising prospects for an agreement that could finally unlock EU accession talks after years of political deadlock. So that's very important. He signaled an imminent deal with Kiev to resolve the dispute over the rights of the Hungarian minority. And then, speaking to reporters in Berlin following the bilateral meeting with Friedrich Merz, Magyar said he was very optimistic about the discussions and pointed to a resolution on a technical level as soon as this week. Oh, that's nice. The issue is politically delicate for both sides. The negotiations are progressing encouragingly, he said. I'm ready to meet with Ukraine's president at the beginning of next week if we manage to agree on these fundamental human rights. And then his comments come after 5 diplomats briefed on the matter told Euronews that conditions for a deal have gained momentum, potentially paving the way for Hungary to lift its 2-year-long veto and launch formal negotiations on either 15th or the 16th of June. So that's quite soon, just in a couple of weeks. Adding to the positive momentum, Magyar secured the release of the funds. I want to come to that. Just what exactly he got from Ursula von der Leyen. Anyway, although he rejected suggestions that the funding is connected to Hungary lifting its veto on Ukraine's accession, Magyar said at the press conference that he was waiting for guarantees from Ukraine on minority rights, indicating constitutional changes might not be necessary. See, listen to that. Magyar said at the press conference that he was waiting for, quote, guarantees, unquote, from Ukraine on minority rights, indicating that constitutional changes might not be necessary. Lifting Hungary's veto is a prerequisite for opening the first accession cluster and so on. And then here's Telex, which is a Hungarian media outlet, and it says, German Chancellor to Péter Magyar, you have proven that the pendulum does not only swing in the authoritarian, illiberal direction. And then here's his election victory. This is Merz speaking. Merz speaking about his Magyars. His election victory is an inspiration throughout Europe. Everybody in Europe is thoroughly inspired. Péter Magyar has proven that the pendulum does not only swing in an authoritarian, illiberal direction, but can also swing back to the center. And so he said this at the joint press conference after bilateral talks were held in Merz's office. And then it was go on. And then Merz said that he was pleased that Péter Magyar came to Berlin so quickly after taking office, saying that inauguration visits always represent a new beginning, which was especially true for this visit. I congratulate Péter Magyar again on this overwhelming victory. This is a significant turning point in the life of Hungary. After the Cold War, in the eyes of many, Péter Magyar is the bearer of a ray of hope in this era. So that's very interesting. So Merz kind of ignores pretty much the entirety of the 35 years since the end of the Cold War. So everything that happened during the 35 years of the Cold War. And then, of course, he ignores the fact that during those 1990 will be the first election, so 36 years, during those 36 years, Viktor Orban was prime minister for 20 of those 36 years. So all the whole establishment of democracy, the constitutional government, everything that Hungary had established during those years, which was more or less the work of Viktor Orban, as I say, who is for more than half of the time since the communist era, more than half of the time, Viktor Orban has been prime minister. But here, the way Merz is speaking is saying, well, that's it. Everything just started here and there, here and now. That's it. We can just ignore the 36 years. And it's kind of interesting because I want to just then let me just because today Merz is always saying something idiotic. I don't want to see here. Yeah. So today Merz was also separate from Magyar. This wasn't with Magyar. He was in East Germany, and the subject of the Alternative for Deutschland party came up, and the question was, well, the AfD is comfortably leading in the polls. So he's leading the CDU, Merz's party, in the polls. Are you going to form a coalition with the AfD? And listen to what Merz said. And there's the story, and it says Merz once again spoke out against cooperating with the AfD, receiving loud applause in the hall. He said that some people were advising him to do so. I say, no, I won't do it. There was a simple reason for this, he explained. This party wants to go back to the time before Adenauer. With Adenauer, we in Germany left the era of nationalism behind us. And I will not lead the Federal Republic of Germany or my party back to the time of Adenauer. I think he means before the time of Adenauer. So let's just see how, whether this, in another article, he says that my answer is no, I will not do that, Merz said during this panel discussion. He said calls for his conservatives to work with the AfD surfaced repeatedly, but he considered the party a threat to Germany's post-war democratic tradition. A few people out there tell me, why don't you just do it together with the AfD? Merz said, after all, they share your views. They tell me they align with you and so on. And Merz described the AfD as a threat to Germany's post-war democratic tradition. And they said, Merz said he believes that the AfD could steer the country back towards a more nationalist era and reverse the democratic course set by Konrad Adenauer. It was under Adenauer that we in Germany finally left the era of nationalism behind us, and I will not lead the Federal Republic of Germany nor my own party backwards behind the era of Adenauer. Now, this is quite a remarkable thing to say, because he's essentially saying that Germany has been kind of removed from any sense of nationalism. I mean, nationalism, one assumes, is that there exists a distinct nation called the Germans, and that a government of Germany pursues as its goal what is in the national interests of the nation of Germans that elected its government to power. That's what nationalism is. That there exists a distinctive nation called Germany, and that a government that purports to speak on behalf of the nation of Germany seeks what is good for Germany, what benefits Germany. That's what nationalism. That it's nothing. There's nothing complicated. There's no elaborate political science there. That's what nationalism means. And here's Merz saying, no, 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 we left all that behind us. In other words, I, as the German chancellor, don't do anything to advance the interests of the German people. Indeed, I don't even recognize there exists such a thing as the German people. That doesn't exist. That just don't exist. We put all that behind us. Now, if he's saying that saying what came before Adenauer, well, what came before Adenauer was Hitler. But Hitler had nothing to do with nationalism. I mean, Hitler was driven by obviously a racist, anti-Semitic ideology, and by an ideology of racist conquest. That is a nationalism. That has nothing to do with nationalism. Indeed, when you start creating an empire, then you're by definition not being a nationalist, because then you have to take into account all of the people that you are now subjugating to yourself, and therefore the essentially they non-Germans come under your jurisdiction. You are no longer a government for the Germans. You are now a government for a lot of non-Germans. It's a fairly that was Hitler was never a nationalist. But it's very interesting that Merz says that, and shows so little understanding of what nationalism means. But what he does understand, and here that's what is quite striking, is that it is not his job to seek what's advantageous for the German people. That isn't part of his job description. That's not what he does. And so it comes along. No, no, no. I'm not going back to the pre-Adenauer era, which is going back to the Hitler era, of course, which is the AfD. Now, what's interesting is that it is he Merz, who is pursuing a foreign policy that is closest of all to the foreign policy of Hitler. He's pursuing a policy of provoking a war with Russia. Every step that he takes, by increasing military production, by increasing military expenditures, by delivering weapon systems for Ukraine, building drone factories in Ukraine, building drone factories in Germany to provide drones for Ukraine. Everything is driven by preparing for a war with Russia. The AfD is opposed to that. The AfD said we don't want that. We don't want that at all. That's the last thing Germany needs, is yet another war in the East. The last one proved completely catastrophic for Germany. We don't want that. But and then here he's consistent, since he doesn't care about what's to the benefit of the German people. He doesn't care about any of that. Then he can absolutely continue with this policy of leading Germany into a war with Russia. Anyway, let's go back quickly to what Magyar was saying. Yeah, yeah. Just okay. Yeah, just sorry. Yep. Yep. Just yeah. Lost my. Yeah. Okay. All right. Now we go back to the news conference between Merz and Magyar, and so here we have So Merz said he was pleased that Magyar had come to us. I congratulate Magyar on his overwhelming victory, and so on. And then he says Merz is confident that Magyar will be able to lead his country back into the heart of Europe, promising that Germany will be a partner in this both economically and in other respects. According to the German Chancellor, this is the second positive message from Hungary after 1989. This is the election result, and we can once again fight together to overcome the division of Europe. And then Merz also brought up support for Ukraine. According to him, we are living in times when the freedom and unity of Europe are under threat from Russia. So, that's what I mean. This, this is the Merz's language, and it's very much harking back to the pre-Adenauer era. We are living in times when the freedom and unity of Europe are under threat from Russia, the barbarians to the east. That's what I mean. This is the language of pre-Adenauer Germany. Freedom and unity of Europe are under threat from Russia. Moscow's war in Ukraine poses a fundamental challenges to us. According to the Chancellor, cohesion is important, and this includes policy regarding Ukraine. We understand that Budapest needs to clarify bilateral issues such as the rights of the Hungarian minority with Ukraine. Clarify. Clarify. That's what you need. You just need to clarify. But this cannot happen at the expense of European support and cannot distract us from the goal of finally officially starting accession negotiations with Ukraine, the Chancellor says. So that's what he's saying here. He's not listening at all. He couldn't care less about the Hungarian minority in Ukraine. He said, fine, if you have to go through this process of clarifying bilateral issues, yeah, go to the process. But we really don't give a rat's ass about the Hungarians. What matters is European support for Ukraine. And then he goes on. Péter Magyar spoke about the special place that Germany has in the hearts of Hungarians. I'm pleased to experience that the role of Hungarians in the dismantling of the Iron Curtain lives in the hearts of Germans, he said. The Prime Minister said that Hungary is a proud, freedom-loving, and honest country. I am happy that once again to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the 1956 revolution in a free, sovereign, and European country. Now, what he's referring to here is that in 1989, Hungary, in the whole spirit of the Gorbachev era, cut the barbed wire between Hungary and Austria. So essentially, you could cross the Hungarian border and go into Austria. This was obviously unheard of because Hungary was behind the Iron Curtain, and so boom, Hungary just cut the barbed wire, and suddenly there was no Iron Curtain. What that did was that the Germans from the German Democratic Republic then all went to Hungary. They were free to travel to another Soviet bloc country, so they went to Hungary, and then through Hungary they went into Austria, and then through Austria they went into the Federal Republic. So this was a huge flow, and of course it did provoke a crisis within the German Democratic Republic, because suddenly people were leaving the DDR and going to the Federal Republic via Hungary, and that of course triggered the whole the decision that led to the opening of the Berlin Wall. Because if you're allowing Germans to leave the German Democratic Republic and go to Hungary, and then from Hungary into Austria, then why can't you allow them to go to the Federal Republic via the Berlin Wall? And that led to the opening of the Berlin Wall. So that's why Magyar is saying, well, we were very much involved in that. Now, what's particularly objectionable about Magyar talking in this way, as if somehow he's involved in this, unlike Viktor Orban, as if I'm involved in this, Viktor Orban isn't Magyar has nothing to do with any of that. Zero. He had nothing to do with anything that happened in 1989. Viktor Orban, on the other hand, was involved in the events of 1989 because Viktor Orban, of course, his career was launched in the reburial of Imre Nagy, the leader of the 1956 uprising. So that's how he became a national public figure in Hungary, because he delivered the speech um, during the reburial of Imre Nagy. So Orban was actually involved in all of that, of the events in 1989 to 91. Magyar wasn't involved in any of that, and Magyar is somehow taking the credit as if somehow he this is the personal thing of his. Well, we were involved with Germany, Hungary and Germany with this bond and then he invites Merz to come and visit Hungary for the commemoration of the 70th anniversary of 56. And then they and then Merz Schmerz pretends that nothing really had happened in Hungary from 1990 to the present day, as if it's only now that freedom and democracy are coming to Hungary. And he said, well, hey, who took down the bloody Berlin Wall? Who actually triggered the events that led to the opening of the Berlin Wall? Well, it was Hungary and people like Viktor Orban. Anyway, so this is and it goes on. Then it goes on. The Ukrainian-Hungarian negotiations, which are currently underway between the two sides on the rights of the Hungarian minority, have also been brought up. According to Magyar, these negotiations are progressing well, and he's confident that they can be concluded at a technical level. So, oh, that's nice. The Prime Minister is ready to meet with Ukrainian President Zelensky after this sometime early next week. Oh, that's good. Sometime early next week, Magyar is already going to meet Zelensky. If we really manage to reach an agreement, he is optimistic that the controversial issues that have been dragging on for 10 years will be resolved and a new chapter will be opened in Ukrainian-Hungarian relations. So that's fantastic. So that'll be clearly, this is just a pro forma, as it was always obvious. These negotiations were always going to be just pro forma. You go through the motions, and they say, "Yeah, we went in there." And this is you can already hear Magyar and Anita Orban saying, "Yeah, we fought like tigers for Hungarian co-nationals in Ukraine, and we got a fantastic deal for them. We're not going to get a constitutional amendment. We're not going to get a change in the law, but we've got cast iron guarantees, absolute cast iron guarantees from Ukraine that they're really going to look after the interests of the Hungarians. And just to illustrate how utterly vacuous and not to say vapid Péter Magyar is, this was even Politico, which is obviously a big booster of the new government. Even Politico, after that meeting in Brussels, kind of said, I don't think Magyar has got much out of Brussels. There's a lot of promises, but nothing very concrete. Brussels wants to see real changes from Hungary, that they intend to dismantle the institutions of Viktor Orban. And so here is this Politico story, which here we have. Hungary's Magyar has, quote, unlocked 16 billion euros in EU cash. Getting it is another story. Budapest still needs to complete a long list of complex reforms before it's wired the cash. So even Politico is being sarcastic about Magyar and Anita Orban high fiving and saying, "Oh, we've got the money," and not really. And here we have Peter Magyar trumpeted his meeting with Ursula von der Leyen in Brussels as a breakthrough. But Hungary is still a long way from receiving the billions of euros in EU funds that Budapest wants. It's a long way. It's still a long way. Based on today's meeting, 16.4 billion euros have been unlocked, the Hungarian Prime Minister told reporters after Friday's meeting, calling the outcome better than he had expected. And then, yet Commission officials offered a more cautious description, describing Friday's deal as a political agreement on a broad direction, blah, blah, rather than a decision to release the cash. Well, we've got a broad political agreement on, broad direction. No one's releasing any cash, which was blocked over breaches of EU law during former leader Viktor Orban's years in power. We haven't agreed to disburse the funds, a senior Commission official said. We've agreed on a list of commitments, which, if completed by the 31st of August, will trigger the payment of those funds. In recent days, negotiations have worked through specific reforms and investments, and crucially, assessed whether they could realistically be completed before the August 31st deadline to formally apply for the money. And then he goes on. There is the first senior commission says, well, there's a political understanding on the landing zone. However, the agreement still needs to be translated into a formal revision of Hungary's plans to qualify for EU post-pandemic recovery funds. Post-pandemic. So we're going back, you can see how many years Hungary has been denied this money. So, this is already going back a few years. And then Commission President von der Leyen said a great deal of work has already been achieved in a very short time, adding, this gives confidence for the next steps to come. Magyar came to Brussels hoping for a win, but ahead of the meeting, EU officials cautioned that the cash would only flow once Hungary has completed complex reforms. Hungary is expected to formally submit its revised recovery plan. The proposal would then need to be approved by the Commission. So you need to come up with a plan, and the plan has to be approved by the Commission and endorsed by EU countries. If all conditions are met, the agreement could unlock up to 10 billion euros. And then it goes on. The agreement also does not restore all of the funding Hungary has lost during the years of disputes with Brussels. According to senior Commission officials, around 2 billion euros in cohesion funding has already been permanently lost after spending deadlines expired. That funding cannot be recovered. In addition, more than 530 million euros remains frozen over migration, asylum, and LGBTQ-related concerns, meaning that even if Hungary ultimately secures the full 16 billion euro package, some EU funding remains out of reach. So you can see that there's going to be a real problem here for Hungary, despite all of the claims that Magyar is saying. Anyway, so I don't think any money is going to be released anytime very soon, unless, and this is the important thing, Magyar makes these substantial changes. So we've already seen in his meeting with Merz that he's saying, yeah, we're going to stop all the nonsense about the Hungarians of Ukraine. We're just going to paper over the differences. That's that. Then we forget about that. And then the next batch will be that is already coming, which is where we get to the European. This is the European Peace Facility. Which I want to. Yeah, yeah. This is the fun part, the peace facility, which but there Magyar has already made the appropriate changes. So here we can see um, Politico again, quite happy. Good, we got that change. It says here that Hungary lifts 2-year block on Ukraine arms reimbursements. Prime Minister Peter Magyar's new government lifts a veto that had frozen over 40 billion euros in reimbursements. And this is the European Peace Facility. The new Hungarian government's effort to warm ties with Brussels could unlock billions in reimbursements for military aid to Ukraine. Prime Minister Magyar's cabinet lifted a veto on partially reimbursing EU countries for weapons they sent to Kiev, reversing a 2-year blockade caused by Viktor Orban. And this is the European Peace Facility, is an off-budget EU funding mechanism. It's a peace facility. It's funding a war, but it's called a peace facility that reimburses countries for about 40% of the value of arms they send to Ukraine from their own stocks. Because EPF decisions require unanimity among member states, Hungary was able to block the mechanism through EU's foreign policy decision-making process. And of course, that's coming to an end because von der Leyen has already said we're moving towards majority voting, and that's all there is to it. We're not going to have this unanimity nonsense anymore. So we're moving towards majority voting, and that's that. Anyway, let's now go to our Gaggle locals page, and this the Gagglers. These are the people who ensure that the dogs are taken care of, that the dogs are in a reasonable mood, that the dogs don't get too distraught about the the drastically underfilled tip jar. So really appreciate that. And as I say to those who follow us on YouTube, if you want to talk to me, if you want to um, interact with me, you want me to address your comments or questions, please join our community, the gaggle.locals.com. Post your comments and questions here. This is where I see them. This is where I address the comments. I can't see all of the questions on YouTube. I just don't have the resources to do that. So if you want to talk to me, please join our community, and then it is a fantastic community. We're very, very talented people, and they are very, very generous, and so that's the way to talk to me. Anyway, first question comes from a veteran Gaggler, Danaki. Always appreciate Danaki's myriad postings. They're always fascinating and entertaining. And Danaki says, how it started February, March 2022, the 3-day dash to Kiev, and total victory in 3 weeks tops a combined arms operation that will be studied in history books. Yes, that claim was, I remember very well, that claim made by Martianov, that, which was quite amazing because he said it really within a few days, that this operation will be one for the books. The Clausewitzes of the future will be studying this military operation, and this will be in the as part of the curriculum in military academies. This is what they'll be studying, this amazing, brilliant Russian strategy. Nothing like this has been seen since the heyday of Napoleon Bonaparte. Yeah, that was Martianov's claim. Anyway, it says ultra competent experts like Martianov, Ritter, Larry, former CIA Johnson. How's it going? May, June 2026, air defenses set up on civilian high rises in Moscow and fuel rationing in Crimea. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's not a the war. I mean, we can say, I think, with some confidence that it's not coming to an end anytime soon. Um, Russia now obviously has launched quite serious bombing attacks on Ukraine. Whether that's going to make any difference seems to me to be rather doubtful. Um, with it's hard to understand why these kinds of bombing attacks will have any more success than America's bombing attacks on Iran, or indeed any bombing attacks in the past. I think we've all agreed and we've all discussed in innumerable podcasts that bombing by itself does not win wars. The bombing during World War II was not decisive in defeating the Wehrmacht. So the bombing that Russia has engaged in is not going to win the war. It has to be go together with a successful and decisive ground operation, and that, I have to say, seems very, very doubtful because with with Ukraine now becoming the drone factory of the world, it seems to me that they have a limitless supply of drones, both manufactured inside Ukraine, but more important, manufactured outside of Ukraine and transported into Ukraine without too much in the way of Russian interference. Then it's hard to see how Russia can make decisive inroads, how it can, at its very minimum, at the very minimum, retake, or even not even retake, but to take the Donbass, because the key military strongholds in the Donbass, such as Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, those are heavily fortified. Taking those is going to be a huge undertaking, requiring enormous manpower, because Russians will sustain huge casualties taking something so heavily fortified. And if you have on top of that the seemingly limitless drones, because Ukraine has short range drones, Ukraine has medium range drones, Ukraine has long range drones. They use the long range drones to attack targets inside Russia at will, so they can make an impact on Russia's infrastructure. They can make an impact on Russia's oil production. Um, that's the long range drone, but the short range drone, they can just presumably just immobilize Russia, just inflict such heavy casualties that it's hard to see how Russia can continue making advances without making some very drastic changes in military strategy, and above all, drastic changes in possibly um, introducing full mobilization inside the country, or whether they intend to, launch a complete annihilation bombing around on Ukraine. I don't think they're going to do the latter. Contrary to what Gilbert Doctorow told us last week during our short podcast, I don't think Russia's going to do that. They haven't done it up to now. I don't think they have the stomach for it. I don't think they have the interest or the will for it. I don't think they're going to assassinate Zelensky. So I have to think, just as a hypothesis, that they're going to have to work out some kind of an agreement. That's not that doesn't necessarily have to be catastrophic. I mean, continuing a war and sustaining such casualties year in year out, that does seem catastrophic. Um, but bringing it to an end, and maybe bringing some kind of a change in political leadership in Russia, in tow, that might not be such a catastrophic outcome. It may be. It absolutely may be. But at the moment, it's hard to see exactly how there could be any dramatic military breakthroughs in the near future. I don't see it. Just I don't know where they're going to come. Um, so yeah, that's so it's kind of it is very, very grim. Anyway, Denaki says the 3-day operation, that piece of shit scum like grifter Escobar. Yeah, tell us what you really think next time. Escobar were orgasmically tweeting about 100 times an hour in February 2022 is becoming such a catastrophe on all possible levels for all parties involved. And I mean the civilians and the poor buggers in the trenches, not that piece of shit feeder war pigs like Shoigu, Patrushev, and his son or their Kievan counterparts. Now, yeah, I think that it is extraordinary, and I have thought for quite some time that these various um, alt media types who are continually talking and optimistically about how well the war is going. It always seems bizarre because there's no things are going well in a war. There's just simply isn't. Anytime somebody's saying, well, we're winning, and you say, winning what? You know, in no human activity is it as true as in war, the saying, it ain't over till it's over. You're not winning a war, you're not losing a war until it is over, until you sign the treaty or the armistice, and then you can decide, well, what happens now. Is this a permanent armistice, a temporary armistice? Can we say anybody has won or anybody has lost? But you can't do it while the war is ongoing. And so year in, year out, it's now well over 4 years since this war has been going on. We've been hearing about how Russia's winning. Russia's winning. Russia's winning. Um, and now the argument seems to have changed. It's more that, well, Ukraine isn't really winning. Ukraine is not winning. Ukraine isn't able to defeat Russia. So that's another cause for celebration. But that isn't the measure. The measure isn't that Ukraine is not winning, that Ukraine is unable to inflict a defeat on Russia. That isn't the measure. The measure has always been, can Russia inflict a decisive defeat on Ukraine? And if one says, well, yeah, but Russia is fighting the whole of NATO. I mean, even though that isn't quite true, because Russia is fighting Ukraine, NATO is certainly involved. NATO is providing the financing and the military equipment and so on. But let's say you make that case. Russia is taking on the whole of Ukraine. Well, then two things one has to add to that, which is, first of all, it was always obvious that was going to happen. NATO was going to go all in on Ukraine. NATO was always going to see this as an opportunity to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. That was built in that NATO was going to do that. Anyone who was launching the special military operation in February 2022 had to have known NATO was going to get involved, and in a very big way. So that's one thing. The second thing is, with NATO involvement, you have two fairly evenly matched sides. And I think this is the point that Richard Sakwa made in the podcast on Friday, that the two sides are actually quite evenly matched. The problem and that this is a problem for Russia, which is that, yeah, the two sides are evenly matched, but Russia is the one that's sustaining casualties. NATO itself isn't. Ukraine is. Ukraine is suffering terribly. But NATO doesn't care about. But NATO itself, the supposed enemy, our supposed enemy, it's casualty free. It's spending money, yeah, spending money. I mean, it is causing economic problems, but those are relatively manageable. It's not the same thing as losing tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. We don't even know how many have been killed. That's a serious loss. So yeah, the two sides are evenly matched. Um, and that it's like the alt media seem to have forgotten that. The alt media, which said, "Oh, Russia's going to win, Russia's going to win, Russia's going to win." Obviously, they're going to win because Russia versus Ukraine. Russia's much bigger than Ukraine. Russia's 4 times the size of Ukraine. Russia has a huge military-industrial complex. Russia has nuclear missiles. Of course, Russia will defeat Ukraine. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Russia will defeat Ukraine. The question is, can Russia defeat NATO? And if you're going to make the argument, well, yeah, Russia is fighting NATO. And it's not just Ukraine. Well, that's a different issue altogether, because that's that that Russia and NATO are indeed pretty evenly matched, and therefore to expect Russia to inflict some huge defeat on NATO, Russia to wipe the floor with NATO, that isn't going to happen. That is not going to happen. And those who have been peddling this line that Russia's going to wipe the floor with NATO, they've been really peddling in delusions. Anyway, thank you so much, um, Danoki. I appreciate that. And then Ivan Grozny. Thank you, Ivan Grozny. Thank you for your generosity. So, George, I'm curious your honest thoughts on how Ukraine stuff ends. Does Russia ever hit Ukraine decision-making centers? What happens? How does this end, and when? That's, I've just been saying it's very hard to know. I don't think, even if Russia does hit the decision-making centers, and if Russia were to hit the decision-making centers now, of course, the question will immediately arise: well, if they're so important, if they're strategically so important, why didn't Russia hit them earlier? I mean, that's what would make sense. I don't think that would make a great deal of difference. I mean, for the same reason, if we apply the logic that we applied to the US bombing of Iran, to that same logic, and we apply it to Russian bombing of Ukraine, then if we say, well, basically, the United States isn't going to inflict a strategic defeat on Iran by bombing its command centers, by killing its leaders, all the decision-making centers. The United States has attacked all of that in Iran. That didn't bring about the defeat of Iran. I'm assuming the same thing is true in Ukraine. You could kill Zelensky. I'm sure that can be done. Russia's always been able to kill Zelensky. I don't think it's going to make any difference. And I think Gilbert Dr. Rowe was wrong. I mean, he came on. I think it was just wrong about that. I don't think Ukraine will collapse if Zelensky is killed. Somebody else will take over. And moreover, NATO will make sure Ukraine does not collapse. NATO will absolutely prop up whoever succeeds Zelensky. And I think, and even if they hit some decision-making center in Kiev, then I'm sure there'll be decision-making centers elsewhere. There isn't just one decision-making center in Ukraine. So I don't think that will be decisive. How does it end? That's hard to know. Sometimes I tend to think, well, it's going to go on and on and on. There's no real prospects of either side making any breakthrough. This could be kind of a generational war, but that doesn't seem sustainable. It's at too high a level. I mean, or rather, too casualty heavy, too intense for it to continue indefinitely. I mean, you can have low-level wars that can go on for years, but this isn't low level. This is pretty high level. So since I don't think that is sustainable, then I tend to think that maybe they will come to some kind of a temporary agreement, some Minsk, Minsk three. And I know everyone said, no, no Minsk three, no, no, Russia will never accept that. Okay, and I'm sure Russia for 4 years and more, and maybe it'll be 5 years, will say, no, 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 no Minsk three. We want a final agreement, final settlement. Well, that isn't available. You can want whatever you want. You can want some kind of a final resolution of the conflict between Russia and NATO. That isn't happening. There's not going to be a final resolution with NATO. NATO is going to, will continue to insist on its right to expand. Russia will continue to insist it's entitled to security from NATO. Very reasonable, that it shouldn't feel threatened by NATO. But unless you can inflict a decisive strategic defeat on NATO, then you can't keep demanding this, some final definitive resolution of this war. And I don't think that, since I don't think that is possible, and I don't think this long-term war along these lines is sustainable, then I have to think that there'll be some kind of an agreement signed. And the closest to that will be some version of Minsk three. I mean, it's because I think that just seems the most rational outcome. But that's how I tend to think of it today. Maybe it'll seem different tomorrow, and I might think that it'll just go on and on and on forever. But now I just tend to think that there has to be Putin's recent comments. He's now said it twice. The first time when he said this is coming to an end soon. The first time I thought that wasn't really very significant. People may have misinterpreted what he meant by that. That was coming to an end, he may have been referring to something else. But he said the same thing. He said this in that meeting in Astana. Again, he said, this is coming to an end very soon. So there was no mistaking this time. That's why I tend to think, well, if Putin now said it twice, that this is coming to an end, maybe there's something in the works. It'll be a very unsatisfactory outcome. I think everyone will find it a very unsatisfactory outcome. But it will, I think it'll bring the killings to an end, and that's always a relief. I would have loved to have had a decisive Russian victory. What Russia wanted. We'll get a final resolution of our conflict with NATO. That's our goal. I'd love to have seen that. But unfortunately, I don't see that in the horizon. Anyway, thank you for that easy question, Ivan Grozny. Thank you. And then Jada says, that very generous of you. Thank you so much. And here's Cynthia. Always very good to see you, Cynthia. Cynthia, a film scholar, film expert, film encyclopedist, with her amazing knowledge of film history and cinema history, of in all countries and in all genres. And we're always just amazed by how much knowledge Cynthia possesses, and how much knowledge she imparts to us here at the Gaggle, because we have our weekly screenings, the Gaggle movie club, and we post the film on Mondays. You can watch the films throughout the week, and so we always have something interesting. And then as you watch the film, you can enjoy Cynthia's very learned, very incisive, and not to say insightful observations and comments and judgments about the film, and how the filmmakers we're learning from other filmmakers what they were trying to communicate and so on. So all of that, we're very fortunate to have Cynthia's expertise here at the Gaggle. And this week, we have the final film of the series on the British Empire, and it's the Four Feathers. Very interesting, very entertaining film. So enjoy the film and enjoy Cynthia's comments. And then next week we're starting a new um, season, and I know what it is. I think, but I'll keep it as a surprise what the season is. Anyway, Cynthia says on the Gaggle recently, I recall Peter calling Norman Finkelstein a liberal Zionist. Is that right? Okay, all right. I mean, I don't remember him saying that, but okay. Or what some would call a J Street Zionist. Um, is that what he said? Okay. A label Finkelstein would find deeply offensive. Yeah, I don't remember Peter actually using that term. I mean, he may have done, I, but I, but but okay. But anyway, all right. To go on, a label Finkelstein would find deeply offensive. Does Finkelstein's intense, deeply flawed critique of Tucker Carlson as a dog whistle anti-Semite, put plus his claim that Israel does not dictate U.S. foreign policy, explain Peter's characterization? If so, has Finkelstein always held these views, or is this a sharp shift that might also apply to his mentor, Noam Chomsky? Well, first of all, I'll say that I can't really speak for Peter, so I don't. The answer I'm going to give will be just on my behalf. So I'm just speaking for myself. I'm not going to speak for Peter. Finkelstein is very much, and he sees himself as a figure on the left. That he explicitly identifies himself as a figure on the left. So his positions, I think, on Israel and Palestine come from somebody who identifies himself as a kind of a 1970s style leftist, very much in favor of native indigenous people, the rights of the oppressed against their oppressors. His theme is very much these were, the struggle of the Palestinians against Israeli occupation and dispossession is analogous to, as the view was from the 1970s, the Vietnamese who were struggling against the French colonialists and then later the American imperialists. And very much the third worldism, the third world, which is of course also struggling against Western imperialism. And Finkelstein, I think, has always seen the Palestinian struggle in those terms. So the Palestinians, they are like all of the peoples of the third world, what used to be called the third world, now is the global south, the peoples of the global south, who are struggling to be free against the Western oppressors. I think that's his position. And that's why when Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens or Megyn Kelly come along and take up the cause of the Palestinians, he says, "Well, how can that be? The cause of the Palestinians is the cause of the left. They're the plaything of the left. This is the left who embraces that cause." And so, because it's Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly and Candace Owens are not figures on the left, then there must be something very suspicious about why they're suddenly embracing the cause of the Palestinians. It can't be because they're embracing the cause of the oppressed or the cause of the natives against their imperial overlords. There can't be. There must be some other motive. and that motive must therefore be anti-Semitic, anti-Semitism. So that's his view. Um, Now, and I talked about this, I think, a couple of weeks ago here. This shows an ignorance and narrow-mindedness on his part, because the cause of the Palestinians has always been supported by figures on the right as well as the left. Pat Buchanan embraced the cause of the Palestinians in the 1980s, as did Russell Kirk, who was the sort of the father of the American conservative movement. It was Russell Kirk. He kind of predated Bill Buckley, who also supported the Palestinians. And of course, Ron Paul also was very harshly critical of Israel. So that's three figures on the American right who embraced the cause of the Palestinians. They're absolutely not interested in any third worldism, fighting against imperialism, and all the rest of the sort of the leftist playbook that Norman Finkelstein grew up with. Their view is the Palestinians have as much right to national self-determination as the Israelis have. So if the West deems it appropriate that Israel should have a right to exist, whatever that means, but nonetheless, that's the credo of the West, that Israel has a right to exist, Israel has a right to national self-determination. Then we'll say, well, the same thing applies to the Palestinians. They also have the right to national self-determination, and they are entitled to their own state. That is the view of the right. There's no third worldism here. There's no fight against imperialism. That's the view that they have as much right to self-determination as Israeli Jews have. But Finkelstein is not able to accept that, and instead he starts smearing Tucker Carlson and starts and Candace Owens and the rest, and says that they're anti-Semitic. He has absolutely no basis whatsoever to make these claims, and he knows he has no basis, which is why he doesn't say it explicitly. He's sort of implying it. He's hinting at it. He's suggesting that they're motivated by anti-Semitism, but he doesn't present any evidence for it. So that's one thing. Now, the second issue that you raise there is that whether Israel drives American policy, and he said no, Israel doesn't drive American foreign policy. There, his view is similar to Chomsky's. So on the first issue of Tucker Carlson, I don't think Chomsky would have gone there. I don't think Chomsky would have accused Tucker Carlson of anti-Semitism. I don't think that's just not Chomsky's style. He wouldn't have done that. The second issue, I think there Chomsky does say he doesn't think Israel runs American foreign policy. American foreign policy is driven by its own imperial interests and so on. It wants to grab territory, grab oil, and so on. The problem with that thesis that it's all America and that Israel is just an also ran, is that it doesn't really make a great deal of sense. Because why would America undertake these dangerous, expensive, destructive wars in the Middle East when America can get everything it wants in the Middle East by peaceful means? I mean, the Middle East is filled with states, one state after another, that wants nothing more than to have good relations with the United States. All the Persian Gulf kingdoms, they want good relations with the United States. Egypt is in the United States corner. Jordan is in the United States corner. The only outliers were Iran and Syria. Okay, so Iran and Syria are a nuisance. Syria is now gone. Iran's still there. Okay. Um, why is that a huge problem for the United States? It isn't. The United States is so overwhelmingly powerful that Iran really doesn't pose much of a problem for the United States. It is a problem for Israel, though. Iran and Syria are unquestionably a problem for Israel. So, therefore, if America is involved in wars against Iran and Syria, then because no American interests are involved, then you'd have to say, well, they're engaged in wars for Israel. It's the only thing that makes any sense. There's no American interest involved, there are only Israeli interests involved. So, just simply by applying common sense, of course, America's doing this for Israel. Now, you can play semantic games and say, oh, well, Israel didn't trick, no, Israel didn't trick Trump, Trump did what he did. Well, no one is using words like Israel tricked Trump. No one's saying Trump was tricked by Netanyahu. But we know that Trump uh, believed that he can get a secure and easy win, but the driving force was Israel. The driving was Israel, but he was thinking, well, he can secure a big win, lots of big money and support from APAC and the Israel lobby, um, and that's what motivated him. The 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 story that America does all this and Israel isn't really very important in all of this. It just makes absolutely no sense. And there I think Chomsky's argument is very weak because when he wants to claim, well, Israel is immensely useful to America, he does in I think one of his books, I think the Fatal Triangle. He tries to explain in what way Israel is hugely important to America. It's very thin. The argument is very thin. Because Israel really isn't very important to America. It's too small, too small and too vulnerable to be important to America. And Richard Nixon, when he was already, towards the end of his life, and he gave his interview to Ted Koppel, said basically that Israel really isn't terribly important for the United States. We have a certain sentimental attachment to Israel, but Israel really isn't that important to us. And Trump has said that. So I don't find that argument at all convincing on Finkelstein's part or on Chomsky's part. I think they're both they both argue that, and I don't find it at all convincing, and I don't find his aspersions on Tucker Carlson at all at all apt or at all plausible, and to be honest, I just find them destructive and quite pointless, because what you really want to do is to build coalitions. You want the coalitions from left to right, and when you can have a coalition, then you should seize on it. Yeah, I mean there are all sorts of issues on which left and right will never unite. You can say, I mean, whatever, like abortion. Okay, the left and right are never going to see eye to eye on that. Okay, so there's not going to be a coalition on the issue of abortion. But on Israel, there could well be. And Tucker Carlson, because he has such a huge platform, has had a huge impact. So if you're Finkelstein and you've been writing about Israel for decades, this is your issue, this is your one big issue, your life's work, then you should be happy that you're now able, something could now happen, something could change, because this cause, which used to be a minority cause, the cause of the leftists, these third world types, these global south types, now you're suddenly joined by people with a huge platform, and maybe that can affect things, maybe that could change things. So Finkelstein should be happy that that louder voices with much bigger platforms than his own have now joined the fight. But casting aspersions against them just seems completely destructive. Anyway, that's my view. And then Cynthia says, this is how AI answered it. Okay, so AI answered it. Finkelstein treats Carlson as an anti Semite who uses classical tropes to protect the capitalist class. Well, maybe. He didn't really, as far as I remember that interview, he didn't say the capitalist class. But okay, but maybe that's implied because, as I said, Finkelstein sees himself as a figure on the left. In his essays, Finkelstein asserts that Carlson engages in scapegoating by implying Israel dictates U.S. actions. Rejecting this fallacy, Finkelstein maintains the U.S. actually controls Israel for imperial interests. While Finkelstein rejects the liberal Zionist label, his Marxist critique of right wing anti Zionism led Péter to characterize him that way on the Gaggle. Well, if that's what he said, I just don't remember he used that term, liberal Zionist. But okay, if that's um, well, I don't know. I think I've said what I wanted to say on that issue. I think he comes at it from a kind of a very narrow sectarian leftism. I think it detracts from anything that Finkelstein is hoping to accomplish, but I think that's how he sees Carlson. And then there are many on the left who will never, never, never make common cause with Tucker Carlson because they prefer to live in their narrow sectarian bubble and talk to their own narrow sectarian comrades. And I think that I think is that's I think where Finkelstein feels most comfortable, and I think it really is quite pointless to do that because you want to be forming coalitions, and particularly when it comes to the subject of Israel, where the forces supporting Israel are so overwhelmingly powerful. You've got APAC, you've got 535 members of Congress, all on on the Zionist dime. So you want to form, you want to build as big a coalition as you can to have any hope of prevailing. And so here, at this very moment, when suddenly there is some hope, here is Finkelstein casting aspersions on Carlson. I think it's wholly pointless. Anyway, thank you so much. Cynthia, and then Cynthia goes on. Crystal Ball also recently hosted Jeremy Ben Ami, founder of J Street, a month after her interview with Finkelstein. In my view, Ben Ami's perspective on Israel aligned roughly with those of Finkelstein and Noam Chomsky. The Jew Dissidents host focused primarily on deconstructing Ben Ami's arguments, while also bringing in Bernie Sanders' position to reinforce their point. Ultimately, they argue that there's virtually no daylight between liberal and conservative Zionists regarding Israel. Really? I would have thought there would be. Well, I don't know. I mean, I didn't hear it, so that to me, I would have thought there was. I mean, I thought there'd be disagreement on some key issues. There. I mean, maybe in effect, the net effect is that they're more or less on the same page. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe one can say Chomsky is a liberal Zionist in that he still defends the principle that the state of Israel should exist. I mean, I think Chomsky takes that view. I guess Finkelstein also takes that view, though he seems to have raised questions about whether he thinks that was such a great idea to create the state of Israel. But Chomsky, I think, probably thinks that that the idea made sense at the time or whatever. But but when it comes to Tucker Carlson and those figures on the right, you can then say that they're liberal Zionists because they don't call into question the right of Israel to exist. And I don't think they call that into question. I think they more or less say that if you are going to have a state of Israel, you should also have a state of Palestine. I mean that national self-determination doesn't inhere in just one group of people. Others enjoy that right as well. But anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. And then Aristotle, thank you so much. Aristotle says, following Ivan Grozny's comment, I guess Ivan the Terrible, could it be that Russia simply does not have the firepower to defeat Ukraine? The mess with Wagner suggests this. Perhaps Russia is taking huge losses and is not capable of winning this war. I would probably go along with that. I mean, I think they don't have the firepower to inflict a decisive defeat on Ukraine. I think they can just go on bombing and bombing. That isn't going to defeat Ukraine, and NATO has limitless firepower. You remember all of these stories that we were hearing during the past 4 years, claiming, "Oh, the NATO's cupboard is bare. NATO doesn't have anything, and Russia will win because NATO isn't going to be able to produce the weapons that Ukraine needs." Well, now we're seeing that this war has been completely transformed by drones. You don't need very sophisticated military technology for that. They're quite straightforward. They're very easy to make, but what they need is satellite technology to guide them, and then they can inflict huge amounts of casualties on Russia. In the short range casualties, and long range casualties. So they can hit targets deep inside Russia, but they can also hit targets actually on the battlefield in the Donbass. So NATO can produce limitless quantities of drones, which means it's very hard to see how Russia then makes very much progress in the face of the swarm of drones. So that's why, in light of that, it's hard to see how this war can continue, because the drones can be made anywhere, and they can be made in Ukraine. Even if you take out one drone factory or take out one command and control center, there's going to be others. So yeah, I think that we had these attacks now in the last couple of days in Ukraine. Not sure it's made very much a difference, and that's why I think it's at the moment it's hard to see how either one can inflict a decisive defeat on the other. And so it is, although to use the overused term, it is a stalemate. Anyway, thank you so much, Aristotle. And then Cynthia says, interestingly, Crystal Ball's father, whose actual surname is Ball, named her after the crystals he studied for physics dissertation. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. It may be one of the most perfectly constructed names ever bestowed, part science, part coincidence, and entirely unforgettable. Well, that's interesting. Well, crystallography is definitely a very interesting field of chemistry and physics. I remember studying it back when I studied chemistry at university, and it wasn't my favorite, but they were fascinating crystals in their complexity. So thank you. And then Aristotle says the police in the UK are truly shocking. Yes. Truly enforcers of multiculti. Yes. In the worst sense. Yes. No real interest in solving crime. Nope. Deeply upsetting what the liberals have done to England. Absolutely agree. It's very, very upsetting. And, and indeed quite shocking, as I think anyone can see. And I would recommend people to take a look at that footage from the police body cam. I mean, you see it once, you don't need to see it again. It's horrific. But that's what policing has done, what liberal policing has done in Britain. Hey, you believe the murder victim. I mean, sorry, you believe the murderer, but not the murder victim. Yeah. So, and here is Marty. Good to see you again, Marty. Missed you last couple of live streams. And we have um, this now. This is Annalena Baerbock, and I can't quite place who with whom she's um, shaking hands. I mean, just looking at it, yeah, it looks very familiar. She looks to me like one of those Baltic state foreign ministers. I mean, well, they're all much of a muchness, but I can't quite. If you could just, yeah, help me who that is. So it's Annalena Baerbock at the UN. She's now the president of the UN General Assembly, shaking hands with someone I would bet is. It's not, no. It looks a little like. God, yeah. I mean, it looks so familiar, but I can't quite can't place who that is. So, I need some help. Anyway, is Anne Marie. Nice to see you again, Anne Marie. It's been a while since we last saw you here, Anne Marie. A classical musician, the world famous musician, performs at the with the most renowned orchestras in the world in some of the most renowned venues in the world. Worked with some of the most outstanding composers and conductors of the 20th and 21st centuries, and we're very fortunate to have her here among Gagglers. That's what I mean. We have the best people here, the people of the highest intellectual and artistic accomplishment here at the Gaggle. And what's particularly beneficial is that we always learn from Anne Marie about classical music, the playing of classical music, the difficulties of performing classical music, and the extreme intricacies that are involved in different performances and with different orchestras and different conductors, all of which are fascinating. And we always learn so much from her. So thank you so much, Anne Marie, for your generosity and for all of your contributions here at the Gaggle. I just posted. You may not have seen it yet. I've just posted a Bartok's second violin concerto, and I wrote a kind of a short introduction to it. I'd be interested if you have the time. I'm sure you don't, because you're very busy with performing, so, actually performing rather than just writing and talking about music. But I'd be interested in, at least in what you think of the Bartok, and maybe about what I said about that. But anyway, thank you so much, Anne Marie. I really appreciate it. And then Aristotle says the judge is typical. This is the British judge. The judge is where are we? Yeah, just had to move. Yeah. The judge is typical of the affected pusillanimous roaches. Oh, I like this kind of talk. Roaches in charge of the shell of a country. Musk exposes them to the light. And that's very well put. I agree with that. Excellent. And then Vic Shakapopoulos says, apropos of yesterday's live stream, okay, I think you were incorrect in stating that the Ukrainian nationalist militias killed more Russians than Poles. I never said that. I didn't say that. I said that they killed Russians as well as Poles. What I said was that the people who complain about the nationalists, they only ever complain about the Poles that they killed. They never complain about the Russians, as if somehow that's fine, that's understandable, and no problem there. Nothing to quarrel with as long as you kill Russians. But I never said they killed more Russians than Poles, so that you misinterpreted what I said. They were active in Western Ukraine. They were massacring both civilians, mostly Poles and Jews, and Polish soldiers, policemen since the late 1930s up to the after-war period. The Russians were not a significant minority in those lands, and the USSR controlled them only briefly during the war, and then again after its conclusion. Yes, but they did kill Russians after the war. The war went on um, in Ukraine went on for many, many years after 1945. So the war went on into the early 1950s. By the time there were no Poles in Ukraine. So the only people they were killing in Ukraine were Russians. Now, I'm not talking about what the numbers were, but the Poles were just driven out. The Poles picked up lock, stock, and barrel, driven out of Ukraine by Stalin when the USSR consolidated its power over the Eastern Galicia and so on, the territories that he'd taken over. So after 1945, the only people that they were killing were Russians. So yes, before that, when they were in, when we're talking about, when Ukraine had been part of Poland, and then during World War II and the Nazi occupation, yes, Ukrainians were these Bandera types and Melnik types were killing Poles. But after 1945, there weren't any Poles to kill; they were killing Russians. Anyway, so it goes on. These Ukrainian groups indeed would kill Soviet soldiers fighting alongside the German coalition armies as military units. They weren't Soviet soldiers, they were not fighting alongside German coalition units, and would massacre Soviet civilians when they would be deployed by the Germans. Well, they were collaborators. They the Ukrainian auxiliaries were the ones fighting alongside the Germans. So, I mean, the way you've presented is a little difficult. You're saying the fighting alongside, who's fighting alongside? The Soviet soldiers were not fighting alongside the German coalition. The auxiliaries, the Ukrainian auxiliaries, were fighting alongside the Germans' coalition armies and would massacre Soviet civilians. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, wherever they would be deployed by the Germans, but not nearly in the same numbers and as systematically as the Polish-Ukrainian borderlands. As I said, this war went on after 1945. The war did not end in Ukraine in 1945. It doesn't matter what, but there was still killing Russians during those years. I mean, you would, I don't know what point you're trying to make here. I mean, they were killing, whether they were killing more Poles than the Russians, they were killing Russians. They were killing other people other than the Poles. This way, as I say, this went on through to the end of the war and afterwards. Anyway, I can't really take this. I think I've answered your point. And Anne Marie says, sorry, but this I don't really understand. You were saying that Hitler was not a nationalist. Didn't he and the Nazis and the term National Socialism stand exactly for an extreme nationalism? No, I don't. I wouldn't have said that, because I think that, first of all, his doctrines was kind of he had a racial ideology. It's not a national ideology. And a nationalist is someone who believes that his people should have their own state and that they should have their own, this national self-determination. It precludes ruling over anybody else, because if you're ruling over anybody else, then by definition you don't have your own state. It becomes a state involving members of another nation, and therefore the whole point of this of the nation state is undermined. That's why the when Germany was created, the Bismarckian Germany was created, then Bismarck deliberately eschewed having Austria-Hungary or at least Austria, as part of the German state. Because if you're going to bring Austria into Germany, then you're going to bring in a whole lot of non-German people, and they would also become a part of Germany. And suddenly, Germany no longer becomes a state for the German, a nation state of the Germans, but a nation state of Poles and Czechs and all sorts of other non-German people. So if you go off and start conquering and ruling over others, you cease to be a nationalist. You've become an imperialist. You can call yourself an imperialist, but you can. But this is an imperialism that was driven by a racist ideology, and a racist ideology has nothing to do with nationalism. It's not about a nation. It's about a race. So what Hitler was driven by, I think, was a kind of a racist ideology, an anti-Semitic ideology, and an imperial ideology. Um, None of that has anything to do with nationalism. The nationalism, what one would identify as German nationalism, is the people who wanted to create a state, a nation state for the Germans. Germans not ruling over anyone else, but just for the Germans. And so my point about Merz was that when he said, "Well, we don't want nationalism," then as I understand it, means I don't want to do anything that actually advances the interests of the German nation. And that's why he's engaging in these wars on behalf of Ukraine. There's nothing to do with the Germans. And and again, with Hitler's war, Hitler was waged a war of annihilation against the Bolshevik, Judeo-Bolshevik ideology. That has nothing to do with nationalism. So that's my point. What the Hitlerian ideology, which is obviously very complex to discuss now, that wasn't a nationalist ideology. It was a nihilistic, annihilationist ideology, but he didn't have anything with nationalism. And anyway, so okay, all right. Anyway, we have Summer Petra says, "I'm hugely disappointed that my well-crafted, incisive remarks and questions have been vaporized from this live stream. I posted just before the start of the live stream. I also made a tip. Who knows what happened to it? I don't know where it is. Where's Cynthia? You did post 2 comments in the comment section here, but they won't automatically transfer over to this live chat. I don't know. I mean, let's see, what have do I see it? I don't see it. Going through this. Where are we? Yeah, I'm sorry. Summer Petros. I don't. Yeah, I understand your disappointment. Perhaps you could post them on in Thursday's live stream, and then I'll try to address them. But yeah, I'm sorry, but I don't see it right now. So I'm sorry. But if you repost the comments, I will definitely address them on Thursday. Marty says, identifying who that woman is. That woman is Ms. Oana Silvia Toiu, the foreign minister of Romania. Funny, I was talking about her the other day, but the picture that I saw of her, I guess I only saw her picture from on her Twitter feed. She didn't look like that. She looked a little different. So I would never have, I wouldn't have recognized her for just going by her picture on Twitter. Okay, well that's interesting. Anyway, I think my time is really up. I mean, it's been a long evening. Thank you so much, everybody who joined me. Thank you so much for all of your comments and questions. Really appreciate them. And please, if I didn't answer any questions today, repost on Thursday, and I will address them on Thursday. But thank you above all to those who contributed to the tip jar. I'm going to have to deal with the dogs, as is my wont. But, thank you for that. See you Thursday. All the best. Good night. Bye-bye.